Hi, I'm Dr. Selena Fisk, and welcome to this episode of Make Data Talk. In this podcast, I help you turn your spreadsheets into stories in a way that is practical, accessible, and hopefully a whole lot more useful than your grade 9 maths textbook. Today is the second episode where I'm going to chat about the role of AI and generative AI in data storytelling. I'm going to focus today's episode on the first of my two data storytelling questions. The first question is, what trends and insights can I see in the data? So today I'm going to share with you a couple of ways that I see AI being able to help us do this, and also what some of the limitations are. In a previous episode on AI and data storytelling, I talked about the ways that it was potentially able to help us organize and sort the data to begin with. We obviously need data that is in a format that we can use. We need data that is valid and reliable. We need to understand it. And AI and generative AI can certainly help us do that in many ways. I'm excited to see where the technology is going to take us. But obviously, having good data in the way that we need it actually isn't data storytelling. It's just kind of sorting and organizing it to begin with. It's really important. It's a really crucial foundation. But at the end of the day, beautifully clean and organized data is not going to change practice or what we do in our day-to-day. So as you would know, I have two data storytelling questions that guide the way we consider the data that we have, particularly when we're working by ourselves or with others. So sometimes we tell data stories to an audience, but more often I'm talking to people about the data storytelling that they do day to day in their own kind of work, when they're working with colleagues, when they're looking at their own data. And so the two questions I use are, what are the trends and insights in the data? And then the second one is, what can I do about it now that I know? And so I'm going to focus on the first of those two today. So really kind of getting you thinking about what's possible with technology that can help us, I guess, identify trends and insights and make some of that data storytelling a bit easier to do. One of the first things that we know that it can do, and it is already starting to do this even in Microsoft Excel, is being able to recognize and discover some of these patterns and insights. In a previous episode, I've talked about the difference between a trend and an insight. A trend is a pattern and something that we see that's reaffirming, I guess, a trend or something that we already knew. So it's kind of confirmation of what was already going on. Whereas an insight is something that surprises us. It changes a pattern that we have in our head. It's something that kind of differs from the norm. So what we need AI to be able to do is we need it to be able to identify both the trends and the insights for us. And to a certain degree, that's kind of already happening. In Excel, for example, in the data analysis section, it can start to pull out some of the trends and insights for you, and it starts to, I guess, suggest things that are worth looking at. But even in ChatGPT, in the paid version at the moment, you can upload a spreadsheet and you can ask it to identify some of the key trends and insights in the data set that you're giving it. So I think that over time, this is only going to enhance, it's going to get better. And to be honest, this is never going to override the need for us as people to be involved in this process. It's going to ideally cut down the time that it takes for us. And it means that we can get to the actions and talking about the really good stuff quicker. But what we already know is that on visualization dashboards, like on a Power BI or on a Tableau, we can set flags. We can set kind of thresholds where we get alerted, often via email, when a particular metric hits a benchmark or when something hits a particular threshold. And that's really helpful. It's a use of AI. It's useful because it can tell us, obviously, when we need to go back to the dashboard and have a look, when maybe if we'd been distracted by other things or we hadn't looked at the dashboard for a while, it's returning our attention to the metrics that we can see. Now, one of the limitations of that, or the key limitation of that, is that it may not always pick up every insight. And the example that I often come back to when I'm talking about this is, if you've been really investing time and effort in something, so say there's a metric that hasn't changed for a while, and you've doubled down on investing in resources, in time, in people, like financial resources, and you're really trying to shift the needle on this one particular metric. At the moment, the current technology that we have, if that metric then stayed the same, the current technology that we've got actually wouldn't identify it as an insight. It would just pick it up as a pattern or a trend and may or may not report on it. It's actually not until the human who understands the context and understands the work and the time and effort that's gone into it would be able to actually say, well, no, that's an insight that really significantly differs from maybe what I was expecting to happen. Because if we've spent all this time and money and effort on this particular thing, we would obviously hope that there would be a change and a positive improvement. But if the pattern was just repeating, our AI, unless we were able to train it in generative AI, for example, it wouldn't be able to pick that up. So that's kind of the biggest hurdle at the moment that I see in terms of recognizing trends and insights. It's certainly got massive potential. And as I said, one of the key benefits of this is that it actually can save us time. If it does some of the analysis for us, then it's cutting down that time, the thinking time, the processing time that for humans, we're never, ever going to be able to do it as fast as AI will be able to do it. But we are going to need to check it because it's not always going to pick up the things that we know are insights. The second thing that I think we've got a lot of potential in, and this is relatively new and there's not a lot out there at the moment, but being able to do more prediction about the future. So what we know is that we can extrapolate data. We've always been able to extrapolate data based on previous trends. And so you think about, say, in a spreadsheeting program where you have some data points and you can extrapolate a trend line out beyond what has already happened. So if you generally know that there has been an upward movement in whatever metrics you're looking at, you could insert a trend line, you could extend that trend line, and you could anticipate what results might be predicted, 6 months, 12 months, 2 years down the track. Think what generative AI particularly can offer us in this space is when we're able to train the model to better understand the context, those predictions are going to be more accurate. So when it learns more about us and is not just using these hard data points, which is what extrapolation does, the predictions and the estimates that they're making will be better. And therefore, we're better able to set ourselves up for success in the future because better predictions are going to mean that we have a better and a more realistic understanding of what's likely to happen. And then we can plan accordingly and we can tweak our processes and our practices along the way to try and stick with that prediction. The other thing as well that generative AI will do is it won't just be a, set and forget. We'll be able to continually enter more information, more data, more understanding of context to refine that prediction model even more. The third piece that I'm going to talk about today is the potential for AI and generative AI to produce some of our data visualizations. And this is already something that's happening. We see it happening in spreadsheeting programs now, where when we have a spreadsheet, we have data, we know that there will be recommended charts. We've had recommended charts in Excel for a really long time now. But the data analysis tab is, becoming smarter and smarter with what it would anticipate we maybe want to see. So rather than having to highlight a specific column and then go to recommended charts, which we have had to do historically, the newer, functionality on Excel particularly is that we can just have an entire spreadsheet and it will suggest possible visualizations for us. A lot of the generative AI models online, though, are also able to generate visualizations for us, and we can essentially much easier than Excel. So if you're not very good at using a spreadsheeting program, it might actually be better to upload, most recently I actually was able to do this in ChatGPT. The visualizations are not super pretty. They're not hugely customizable like they are in Excel. But I tell you what, if you're not great with Excel and you need a graph and you have data in a spreadsheet, if you just drop it into ChatGPT, obviously, big caveat there, thinking about privacy and the sensitivity of the information you're uploading, but you can just ask it to produce scatter plots, box and whisker plots, bar charts, whatever you need. And I had one the other day that I did, and I was looking at 2 different metrics. And I asked it to create the first one, and I made a few tweaks. And then I asked it to create the second one. And then when the second metric, I guess when I started to look at it, I realized that the scales were not the same. And so they weren't easy to compare because the scales were different. So it was kind of skewing, I guess, the height of the bars and all of that. And the really nice thing was I was just able to add in another prompt to get it to change the scales back to match the previous version. So very little technical skill required from me to be able to do that. Obviously, I needed to understand that I wanted the same scale on the X and the Y axis. I wanted it to be comparable, but compared to what it would take to make those tweaks in Excel, for some people, it would be faster to do it using generative AI. So the three things that we've talked about in this episode are the way that AI, but particularly generative AI, can help us look for those trends and insights, which is that first data storytelling question. So there's huge potential there. Huge potential, and particularly even more coming around the predictive analytics. So what does the future hold? What is it likely to look like if we continue on the current trajectory? But beyond extrapolation and really thinking about how do we train it to learn context and, whether it's market or seasonal trends or whatever it might be. There's really kind of cool possibilities that I see coming. And the final one is that data visualizations. So thanks so much for joining us today on this episode of Make Data Talk. If you found this useful, feel free to share it with somebody who's into AI and data storytelling at the moment. As you know, this is also available as a newsletter, so it will be available on my LinkedIn newsletter. It is also called Make Data Talk. And take care of yourself and stay safe.